everyone, and welcome to Right Reason, the show where we talk about why right makes might, with our actual real host of the show, Dr. Charles Rice, Professor Emeritus, University of Notre Dame Law School, and truly one of the great outstanding teachers and thinkers of our time.
Keep going.
You've been, okay. Your students love you. The university, didn't the university triple your salary year on year? Was that right? Did I hear that?
I never got that letter.
Oh, you did?
No,
well, okay.
no,
well, they should have.
Yes.
They should have. This is part of our ongoing series where we're talking actually about the intellectual tradition of the Catholic Church and what certain terms that we hear all the time in the popular culture, how they're completely misunderstood, misinterpreted, and the chaos that's rained down as a result of these misunderstandings and misinterpretations. Let's start with freedom. Freedom means I can pick what I want, right?
Not really.
No?
No. Freedom, the contemporary culture looks at it that way. The freedom is the ability and the permission, if you will, to do whatever you want. Mm-hmm. And that whatever I choose to do is the right thing for me. It goes back to the individualism of the Enlightenment. Mm-hmm. And the point that John Paul II emphasized in Veritatis Splendor and elsewhere is that freedom has to be connected to the truth, right? And one reason why conscience is so downgraded today and mistreated is because it is separated from the truth. Now you think about it, the question is, what is your conscience? What is it? What's the act by which you judge the rightness or wrongness of a particular act? Why is it important? It's important because it is a judgment by which we reach the truth of our nature. And the good is that, St. Thomas said, the good is that which is in accord with the nature of the thing. Mm-hmm. It's good to put gasoline in your gas tank, not sand. It's not good to put sand in there because you're violating the nature of your car.
Even though you're free to put
You're
sand
free to put sand in your gas tank,
mm-hmm.
but then you're no longer free to drive your car.
Mm-hmm.
All right? And the whole notion of freedom, John Paul said, once it is separated from truth, becomes an individualistic decision. Conscience becomes, as he said again in Veritatis Splendor, conscience becomes merely my decision as to what I think is good for me.
Let's put this in the context of, during this taping we have the presidential, primary season going on in the 2012 election. And some of the big things that have come up in this campaign season, because they've been introduced by the Obama administration, is this HHS mandate, Health and Human Services mandate, where Emperor Obama has said, Catholic Church, you will provide contraception, or then he sort of walks away from it, but not really, and says, okay, well, your insurance companies can provide it.
Not can provide it, must provide it.
Yeah, must provide it.
Yeah.
And what I found particularly interesting about this is as soon as this all came out and all the hubbub and reaction, everything happened, you had various Catholic students, one of them a senior at Catholic University of America, senior poli-sci major, and then a law school student at Georgetown, two women, both coming out saying, with this notion, I'm free to do this. This is a good thing because I have a right to health care. And it even obviously moved right into the whole political campaigning as well. In the GOP primary, Rick Santorum, who identifies himself as a faithful Catholic, traditional Catholic, said something kind of strange. He said that yes, I think contraception is bad. I think it has bad effects, but I wouldn't do anything as president to try to curtail someone else's freedom to use it. Does that square?
Not really, I don't think.
I think it's a hard position to maintain.
It's a judgment. You have to make a judgment as to what the common good requires. Mm-hmm. And the reality is that contraception, and this again could be an entire segment,
sure. Probably will be.
Contraception is really not just a moral evil, it's a social evil.
Mm-hmm. Meaning? What's the
Meaning
distinction?
that, as Paul VI said in Humanae Vitae, it separates the unitive and procreative aspects of the conjugal act. Until the Anglican Lambeth Conference of 1930, no Christian denomination had ever said that contraception could ever be objectively a good moral choice.
Mm-hmm.
The the Comstock laws
Right.
in the 19th century, which restricted availability of contraceptives, were all passed by Protestant legislatures.
Right.
And they were passed because they saw contraception as a social evil.
Now, what does that mean?
What it means, what the Washington Post, believe it or not, said after the year after the Anglican Lambeth Conference, when the United States Council of Churches adopted Lambeth, the approval of contraception, the Washington Post, if you can believe it, said that's the end of marriage. That's the end of the family.
They'd read Costi Connubii.
Well, that came out in 1931, yeah. And the question for a legislator is, how do you balance the common good against prohibition of things like that? Mm-hmm. St. Thomas said that the law should not try to enforce every virtue or forbid every vice. He said the things that the law, the human law, must forbid are things without the prohibition of which the community could not survive. Mm-hmm. And he said, murder, theft, and such like. Mm-hmm. All right? Now, murder would take abortion.
Sure.
All right?
Mm-hmm.
The state must protect every innocent human life. And theft, sure, because what kind of community would it be? When you get beyond that, you get into questions of judgment.
You know an awful lot. Let me interrupt you, but you know an awful lot about
everything.
Everything.
Yes, yes.
But you know a really lot about many things.
Yeah, right.
One of them is sort of the mind of Aquinas on some of these things. Obviously, when he wrote that, the idea of like widespread government-sponsored, mandated, imposed contraception probably hadn't entered into his mind of the time he was in the 13th century. Do you think his such like would now embrace the issue of contraception as we understand it today when he says murder, theft, and such like?
I think it depends on what kind of a law you're talking about.
Okay.
I mean, he was emphatic, and incidentally, in Donum Vitae, the Catholic Church said that for every violation of the child's right to life, the state must impose penal sanctions. So that's not just a 13th century idea. Mm-hmm. But the question of what should the law do, a good example would be the question of same-sex marriage. Mm-hmm. Right? And a good analysis of it in a Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith document called Considerations on Same-Sex Marriage or whatever. They discussed this, and they said there's a difference between foregoing sanctions on private activity and, on the other hand, recognizing that private activity is privileged and as legitimate. Mm-hmm. And that's the question. There's a legitimate question as to whether the law has to enforce criminal penalties against consensual sodomy, for example. Mm-hmm. That's a fair question. Do the law enforcement people, the cops, have better things to do than enforce that? Mm-hmm. But it's a completely different question when you say, well, that activity should be recognized by the state as equivalent to marriage.
Sure, elevated and
Oh yeah, yeah.
brought out of a bedroom.
And that's
into
why
a
when
courthouse.
you talk about things like contraception, let me give you an example. One of the cases in the Supreme Court that began this whole anti-life thing was Griswold against Connecticut in the 60s, where the
1965.
the court dealt with the Connecticut law, which made it a crime for married couples to use contraceptives. The law had not been enforced, but it was a made-up case, all right? And the court used that as a device to institutionalize a constitutional right of privacy in these matters. Justice Douglas, all right? William O. Douglas. Some used to say William Zero Douglas, but I would never say that.
You would never say that other people said zero.
Yeah, I would never say
Didn't Nixon say something like that?
something like that.
I will never say my opponent is a loser.
Yeah, right. But Douglas said there is a right of privacy in the penumbras, shadows, formed by emanations from the Bill of Rights, all right? But now watch this. The law in Griswold was a bad law. It made it a crime for married couples to use contraceptives. Well, how do you get your evidence?
Yeah.
You see? And that's the kind of thing where a perfectly sound judgment can be made that the law shouldn't be doing that.
Right.
Now, a separate question was in Eisenstadt against Baird.
Right.
That followed that quickly, where the court struck down the provision of contraceptives to unmarried people, public distribution. And it's a totally separate question
Yes.
as to whether they should be allowed to be distributed like that. I mean, it's a completely different question. So Santorum says whatever he said. I mean, that there is a judgment call there. In my opinion, certainly when you're dealing with minors, if you don't recognize that contraception is not a neutral activity,
Right.
but something as the Christian tradition recognized for 2 centuries, 20 centuries, it's something which is a socially destructive thing. In my opinion, if you don't recognize that, you're opening the door to what we have today. What we have today is the government promoting contraception abroad, in foreign countries,
Absolutely.
here, and
It's
it
even
is
gone in
disturbing.
some steps even beyond promoting. It's imposing.
Oh yes, yeah. So, I mean, you.
At least imposing payment for it.
Yeah, I mean, we can get into that, at a later time. But just as long as we're talking about it, think about it. Why is it wrong? Why is contraception wrong? First, it separates the unitive and procreative aspects of the sexual act. Secondly, it makes men and women arbiters of whether and when life will begin. And if you're the arbiter of whether and when life will begin, you're going to make yourself the arbiter of whether and when it's going to end,
Right.
as in abortion, euthanasia. And third, it frustrates the total self-donation, which ought to characterize the conjugal act. There's also a fourth reason, and that is that it recognizes that there's such a thing as a life not worth living.
Yes.
That is the life that would have come into being had we not changed the act. See?
Just before we go to break here, I'm reminded as you say that of a priest who once, a couple with, I think they had 2 children, maybe 3 children, sort of confronted the priest on this issue. And he said, I'll make this very simple for you. Which of your 3 children do you wish had never been born?
Yeah.
That's a very powerful, and it shut them up.
Yeah.
It was a very powerful and yet simple point. It was like a nuclear bomb that ended the discussion.
Yeah, I know I know a couple where I don't know how many they have, but the third child got angry with their mother one day and said, "You should have stopped at 2." And she thought about it, right?
We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back with Dr. Charles Rice, and we're going to talk about freedom of conscience when it comes to voting and what happens when Catholics step into a voting booth. How do they weigh all of these things? We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back to Right Reason with the presumed genius. We keep ratcheting this up every single time we come back. Soon we'll be talking about the divinity of Dr. Charles Rice.
That's right. Yeah, we'll stop there. Right?
All right, let's presume where we were before the break, where we let's talk about Catholics and as they're voting. We hear this all the time. We Catholics in Alliance for the Common Good. Catholic, whatever the other group is, whatever these political groups that form, and they hang around these kind of social justice issues, and there's this conscience, and yet they go over to the sort of life issues which deal directly with questions of intrinsic evil, and those somehow kind of just get pushed aside. People use these arguments. Catholic voters use these arguments and this approach to say, well, abortion is just as bad as war. Or war is more
right.
evil than abortion, and all these kinds of things.
Right.
How does a Catholic voter properly form his or her conscience?
Good. The issue is cooperation. Mm-hmm. You got to understand the two kinds of cooperation. Mm-hmm. We can't avoid. In things that we do, assisting other people who are doing evil. We pay taxes, right? And everybody will agree that the income tax in many respects is unjust, right? Mm-hmm. We pay taxes and so on. We do certain things that help others do evil. Let me give you an example. Suppose you have a hospital where they do abortions on the 14th floor, right? Mm-hmm. And you got a guy who is working in the gift shop down on the first floor. And the question is he obliged to quit his job? Mm-hmm. Now, there are two kinds of cooperation. One is formal cooperation in evil, mm-hmm. where you either intend to promote the evil the other person is doing, or you are actually part of it.
Okay.
John Paul dealt with this in Evangelium Vitae. That's formal cooperation in evil, which is always wrong. So the guy who is in the bookstore, in the gift shop on the first floor, you go up and you ask him, "Hey, Freddie, why are you working here?" And he says, "Because I want to help what they're doing up on the 14th floor, mm-hmm. abortions." Mm-hmm. That's formal cooperation, always evil. All right. If you and I'm just retailing what the Vatican has said on this. Mm-hmm. Cardinal Ratzinger, when he was the head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith in 2004, and others since, the formal cooperation in evil is always wrong. So, if you go into the voting booth and you have a pro-abortion candidate, and you vote for him because of that, that is materially a sin. That's mm-hmm. wrong. All right? Now, the other kind of cooperation is material. And material cooperation exists all the time in many ways. You pay your income tax, you're cooperating in evil, but mm-hmm. you still have to pay your tax. Because whether material cooperation is morally wrong is fact determined.
Right.
Depends. And if it's proximate and material and essential, that kind of thing, it can be wrong. But it's a fact determination. As Cardinal Ratzinger, now Pope Benedict, expressed it in 2004, he said, you can never, ever, Catholic can never vote for a candidate because he is pro-abortion.
Mm-hmm.
If you vote for that candidate not for that reason, you would disagree with his position on abortion, you can vote for him only if there are sufficient, what he called proportionate reasons.
Mm-hmm.
All right?
And now we get into it.
Now you get into the fact question.
Right.
The best analysis of it I've seen is that by now Newark Archbishop Myers,
Mm-hmm.
where he talked about this, and he said, what can be a proportionate reason to vote for a candidate who is in favor of abortion or euthanasia or same-sex marriage? And his answer essentially was none.
There aren't any.
None, all right?
All right.
And you hear all this stuff where people say, well, it's war, I want to stop the war and all that. Well, listen, in abortion, what the state is doing is authorizing the intentional killing of the innocent.
Sure. That is a war.
Yeah, well, they're authorizing. The state is authorizing it.
Sure.
In war, under the law of the United States, it's just the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
The intentional killing of the innocent is itself a crime.
Right.
We've had a number of publicized cases relating to that. In war, you have the principle of the double effect,
Mm-hmm.
where innocent people can be killed, but neither the United States law nor the moral law permits them to be intentionally killed.
Right.
If you're, for example, when the United States bombed Gaddafi's home
Mm-hmm.
in an attempt to get him, all right?
Sure.
Let's assume it was a legitimate military target or whatever. Innocent people were killed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, under the principle of the double effect, if you have an action can have two effects. Let's put it in the abstract. You have a justified military target here, and you know that if you hit that target, the innocent people around it, there are some innocent people around it who are also going to be killed.
Mm-hmm.
Can you do it? And the principle of the double effect has four elements. The action itself that you're doing has to be good. That is that...
Or at least neutral.
Yeah, which is good.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the hitting of that target, we're assuming that is
It's bad.
legitimate,
Right.
legitimate,
Right.
and it's worth hitting. The bad effect is not intended. All right.
Mm-hmm.
There is sufficient reason for permitting the bad effect,
Mm-hmm.
and the good effect is not achieved by the bad effect. The
Right.
elimination of that missile site or whatever it is not brought about because the innocents were killed. The classic example is the removal of the cancerous womb,
Mm-hmm.
where the mother is pregnant and she can't postpone the delivery.
Surgery, right. Mm-hmm.
All right, and the question is if that womb, the entire womb, is not taken out, she's going to die.
Mm-hmm.
Under Catholic teaching, you can do that.
Mm-hmm.
4 elements. The act of removing the womb is itself a good act. It's removing a diseased organ.
Mm-hmm.
All right? You know that the baby in the womb is not viable, can't be taken out. You know the baby's going to die.
Mm-hmm.
Number 3, you don't intend the baby to die. And number 4, the good effect, saving the life of the mother, is not brought about because the baby died,
Right.
but because you took the womb out.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go back to the ballot box, all right, to the voting. If you are looking at the pro-abortion candidate and you're saying, well, I'm going to vote for Obama because of his position on war or welfare or whatever, whatever it might be, those things are intrinsically different from abortion, because in none of those things does the state explicitly authorize the killing of the innocent. See, that's it. That's the difference. Abortion and euthanasia, and we have state-promoted euthanasia, whatever, totally different. And same-sex marriage is not taking life, but it's equally fundamental. So that's the thing, and you make a judgment as to whether there are, as Ratzinger said, proportionate reasons for voting for a pro-abortion candidate. And I can't imagine that there are for voting, for example, for Obama.
Yeah. What could possibly be, could eclipse in its evil, the killing of, millions of children.
That's right.
I mean, tens of millions of children somewhere else, I suppose.
Yeah. But that's what you have to do. And remember that the material cooperation issue is a fact-oriented issue.
Right.
And the reason why the Vatican has been very firm on this is because of the unique character of the pro-life issue.
Yes.
That it involves intentional killing of the innocent.
Right.
And none of those other things do.
So is it a specious argument for Catholics in Alliance for the Common Good? I'll just use those because we do a number of news stories on them frequently during campaign seasons. So they come up and they say, yes, we don't like abortion, but the candidates who are opposed to abortion don't care about the war, they don't care about climate change, they don't care. And when you add all of these other things up, you're talking about many more people, possibly dying, than the cost of abortion. So therefore, Catholic moral thought allows us, and sometimes they will say compels us, to vote for this candidate even though he's pro-abortion.
Except for one thing, that abortion is unique. Like like euthanasia. Abortion is unique because it involves the state authorizing the intentional killing of the innocent. You can't get any worse than that.
Right.
Capital punishment is often advanced. Well, I'm going to vote for him because he's against the death penalty. The death penalty is not intrinsically wrong.
Right.
It can be used only where it is absolutely necessary to protect other people from this criminal.
Right.
But it doesn't involve the intentional killing of the innocent.
We've only got a couple seconds left here, but go through the differences. This really is the distinction: intrinsic evil versus non-intrinsic. What is that?
Well, when I say an intrinsic evil, the moral act, and you see this in the Catechism, number 1750, 52, whatever. The moral act consists of three things. Consists of the object chosen, what you're doing, the intention, or really the purpose, why you're doing it, and third, the circumstances. And the difference between the Christian morality, as taught by the Catholic Church, is that there's some objects chosen that are intrinsically wrong of themselves. You can never choose them.
Adultery.
Yeah. Of course, you have to define the crime.
Sure.
Theft. But you have to define what is theft. And then the purpose or the circumstances can never justify that. That would be worth getting into the next deal.
We may very well.
Are we out of time?
We're out of time, as always.
Okay. All right.
Just get into it, and you got to stop. But that'll conclude this week's episode of Right Reason, where right makes might, with Dr. Charles Rice, and we hope you're enjoying these episodes. They're all thought-provoking, and that's the whole point. That's why we call it Right Reason. Catholic faith, Catholic life is imbued with the intellectual life. We started the universities, we've promoted it, we did all this stuff.
That's right.
Catholicism, I shouldn't say Catholics. Catholicism is a smart religion, in addition to being the one established by God.
Yeah.
And those two have some relationship to each other.
Yeah. Right.
Until we see you next time, God bless.